Hello guys! As you know, I am providing bike analysis as a service on my website, and some of you already requested me analysis regarding offset bushings and what is the effect of the offset bushings in the bike kinematics. So, in collaboration with the offsetbushings.com, I am bringing you this video, so stay tuned guys. In this video, we are going to talk about 4 topics. First, what is offset bushing? Second, what is the effect on the geometry? Third, what is the effect in bike kinematics? And 4, how to check for compatibility. As the name suggests, an offset bushing is a bushing where the hole is slightly offsetted regarding the shock eyelet. And with this type of bushings you are basically decreasing the effective length between high to high. So you are shortening the shock, and the shock stroke, the compressing part of the shock, this part here, remains the same. So you decrease the length of the shock without affecting the amount of shock travel and the amount of wheel travel in your bike. The main point of the offset bushing is to actually improve the bike geometry, and basically by shortening the shock length you decrease the bottom bracket and you slacken the head angle of the bike, so you get a more aggressive geometry. This is particularly important for instance for old bikes with outdated geometry. So using these bushes is a simple and cheap way to improve the bike geometry and get a much better riding handling. So how can exactly the bushings, offset bushings, can affect the geometry? So the answer is simple. If you look to this drawing, this bike drawing over here, so with the offset bushings you are shortening the shock and you basically are shifting and skipping the travel. So as you can see, this is the original bike, and now with the offset bushings the travel skips, okay, the travel shifts upward. So this will be your new starting position. It's like having the same bike, but now the travel starts with the linkage already slightly compressed, okay? However, keep in mind that despite this initial shift in the travel amount will be similar because the shock stroke is not affected. This means that the bike, instead of bottoming out over here, it actually bottoms out slightly upper into the travel, okay? So at the end of the day, if this is your original travel, when you use offset bushings, the travel shifts upwards, okay? In some cases, your bike might not be compatible with these bushings because by shifting the travel, you might have clearance issues with the tire or the rear triangle hitting the main frame. So in most cases you can contact offsetbushings.com to check for compatibility, but at the end of the video I will also talk about that. Importantly, the effect of the offset bushings on the bike geometry will always depend on the leverage ratio, particularly the initial leverage ratio. So for instance, an example, if a bike has an initial leverage ratio of 3, that means that if you shorten the shock by 4 millimeters of offset, 4 times 3 is 12. So you shift the initial travel by 12 millimeters, okay? If for instance the bike has an initial leverage ratio of 4 times 4 is 16, so you skip the initial travel by 16 millimeters. Okay, so the same amount of offset can have different amounts of travel skipping depending on the bike. And the more the travel skips at the beginning, the more the BB will drop and slacken the head angle. Moving on to our third point, the effect of bushings in bike kinematics. Basically, the bushings won't affect drastically the kinematics, the characteristics of the linkage design. However, there are some cases where the bushings might change a bit the progression, for instance. If your bike has a quite constant leverage ratio, the bushings won't affect much the progression. Now, imagine that your bike has a very decreasing leverage ratio that decreases a lot at the end of the travel. So, by using these bushes, you are basically shifting the curve of the leverage ratio, so you get into a very progressive part of the curve. The opposite is also true. For instance, imagine that your leverage ratio increases at the end of the travel. If you use the offset bushings, you are shifting the curve of the leverage ratios, so you get more increase at the end of the travel. So you basically decrease the progression of the bike. To test the compatibility of offset bushings with your bike, you have to account for two things. The first one is the clearance around the shock terminal, and the second one is the clearance at bottom out. Regarding the first point, as shown in this picture, when you use offset bushings, you are increasing and protruding the terminal of the shock. As you can see, the distance between the hole and the shock hand is higher using offset bushings. Therefore, you need to make sure that the shock won't hit the frame and also that the shock can naturally rotate without rubbing the shock terminal against the frame. Now, the second point to take into consideration is that with offset bushings, the bike will bottom out further into the travel. So you need to make sure that the rear triangle or the tire won't hit the main frame. To account for this, you need to know the eye-to-eye distance of your shock, okay, the stock distance, and you also need to know the shock stroke as depicted in this illustration. Having these numbers, you just subtract them. So, for instance, imagine this shock that has 200 millimeters of eye-to-eye distance and 50 of stroke. Subtracting them will give 150 as a result. Now, remove the shock from your bike and fully compress the linkage until the maximum point. At this moment, just measure the distance between the middle of the shock mounting points. So imagine that in this case you got 140 millimeters. Now just subtract the previous number, the 150 millimeters, with the 140 millimeters. That will result in 10 millimeters, and this value will be the maximum offset distance possible with your bike. You can have different amounts of offset in this type of bushings, and that basically depends on the diameter of the bolt that the shock uses. So for a M10 bolt you can only get 1 millimeter of offset per each bushing. With an M8 bolt you get 2 millimeters of offset for each bushing, and with an M6 bolt you can get 3 millimeters of offset for each bushing. So if you use a pair of bushings, you double the amount of total offset, obviously. At offsetbushings.com you can get more info about these bushings. They basically made custom bushings for each bike, and they use aluminium and brass to make the bushings. And on their website you can find more about the supported bikes, the prices and the bushing options. Okay guys, so I hope you liked the video. Please don't forget to subscribe the channel and put a like and share with your friends and family and whatever. And see you next time. Bye!